Can Catholics and other Christians serve in the military? Should Catholics and other Christians serve in the military? These are some questions that are near and dear to my heart, and we're going to take a look at these today. I'll be right back. Well, hello there, I'm Mike Creavey, and this is the Gracious Guest Show, and I'm delighted that you've stopped by today. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. I got a lot of wide variety of stuff, all kinds of different interviews and some solo videos, some teaching videos, but generally speaking, we always look at this intersection of faith and reason, faith and culture. We'll look at the questions that often come up when it comes to trying to live your Christian life, your Catholic life, in the world. What difficulties do we face? What challenges are there to doing that to doing that authentically? And today we're taking a look at one that's very near and dear to my own heart, which is namely the question over military service. Didn't Jesus basically say to turn the other cheek, right? Wasn't Jesus all about nonviolence? How could a Christian even think of serving in the military, where you potentially would have to take another's life or be involved, at least in some capacity, in operations that could result in the death of someone else, even if they've done terrible things? These are important questions, and they've been with us since the very beginning of the Christian faith. And so in, I think, all ages of the church, you see people making a pretty strong defense on occasion, for pacifism, even for an extreme pacifism that would say that there's never any circumstance where it is justifiable to take up arms or to even put up a defense of yourself in such a way that it was likely to take another person's life. So this opens up all kinds of questions that have been discussed and debated through the centuries. What has emerged as the church's just war doctrine, for example, or teachings about self-defense, the parameters of that. Now, this discussion is taking place, in this case, as you're going to see today, on another show. And I'm very happy to share the link below with you as well. I have the full interview here, courtesy of the host of that show, Catholic Table Talk, William Sauber. And William is a former Homeschool Connections student, which is how he found out about me as a Homeschool Connections instructor. I never actually had William in my class. Unfortunately, I would have loved to have him in class, but he sort of found me later, and he was interested in my eschatology course on the last things: death, judgment, heaven, hell, Catholic understanding of those things we call eschatology, or the study of the last things. And William reached out to me to do a show on that topic a few years back, and then consequently, he's had me back a few other times to take a look at a couple different angles on this question and related questions, faith and military service. And I was delighted to share that with him. This is a part 2 in a way, but we kind of covered a lot of different territory than we did in the first go-around. So I wanted to share this one, and William was gracious enough to let me share it. But I definitely want to really encourage you to please make sure you look at those links below and support William. He's got a fantastic podcast that he does and spends a lot of time on. It has some great guests. So I really want to sing the praises of Catholic Table Talk and ask you to check that out. So in the meantime, here's my little chat as a guest on William Sauber's Catholic Table Talk. Check it out.
Welcome to the Catholic Table Talk podcast. This is where everything Catholic is on the table. New episodes Thursdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on most podcast platforms. Here's your host, William Sauber.
Well, welcome back to the show, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for another great episode here on the Catholic Table Talk podcast. If you have a show or speaker request, please feel free to email us at catholictt@gmail.com. Again, it's Catholic with 2 T's at gmail.com. It's the fastest way to get a hold of us if you want to cross a great speaker, or if you want to cross a very good show topic that you would like us to discuss on the show. More than happy to do that for you as well. Also, if you're interested in advertising your event or your business, please email us as well. Today's sponsor is Dr. George Saguma. Dr. George is a family physician who practices holistic health and healing. He is the author of God Loves Children, Lead with Love Daily Devotions, and All for the Glory of God Daily Inspirations. Find more about Dr. George at drgeorgesaguma.com. Thank you, Dr. George, for sponsoring today's episode. Today's episode, we kind of took a year in between, but we're back on this today with faith and military service. And they're definitely different, but there are things that kind of like the same about them. Like for example, last time we talked about, what is it like to have someone have your life in someone else's hands, that type of thing. What we're called to do, what does the church teach about killing or letting people, loving your enemies, that type of stuff. And we got from a veteran his perspective for being in the military for 12 years and great speaker. And now he's back on the show to give us part two of this faith and military service. Mike Creavey holds a bachelor's degree in history from the Catholic University of America and a master's degree in theology and Christian ministry from Franciscan University of Steubenville. And a Spirits Youth Minister, Kickoff Mission Coordinator, Catholic radio broadcaster, high school theology teacher, and former U.S. Army officer with combat tour duty in Iraq. Mike feels profoundly blessed to bring the gospel to everyone he encounters. He endlessly enjoys exploring the intersection of faith and culture through regular YouTube videos, which I highly recommend, podcasts, presentations, and his blog, the gracious at thegraciousguest.org. Again, really check out his blog. It's very great. I highly recommend it. His first book, Return of the Lord, Narrative Reflections on the Apostles' Final Moments, is available on Amazon right now. And Mike lives in the greater Harrisonburg, Pennsylvania area with his wife and children. And again, 12 years in the military, and he's so gracious enough to come back on with his time frame here. So welcome back to the show, Mr. Mike Creavey. So Mike, first of all, I don't know if I said this last episode, but thank you very much for your service to our country,
Oh.
and thank you for your time here today to join us for part two.
Yeah, and hey Billy, it's my pleasure. It's exciting to be back and to take a look at this. I want to throw one thing in there that's just kind of
Sure.
fun. Right before I hopped on here with you, I was recording I've just got a few left to go, but I'm trying to do a an audiobook version
Okay.
of the Return of the Lord book. So I've been testing my my sort of audio narration and to some degree, a little bit of voice acting chops. So
Sure.
I am absolutely immature, and I welcome people's constructive criticism once it comes out. But it is something that's a lot of fun and something I'm hoping to get more into. So I'm adding
Awesome.
that to the list of things I'm trying out.
Yeah, awesome. Well, to be honest with you, Mike, real quick, is I definitely like the audio version books more than I do sitting down reading a book. I just get more information that way.
Yeah,
So
me too.
awesome.
That's one of
Yeah,
the reasons I did it. Yeah.
gotcha. Well,
Yep.
awesome. Thanks for throwing that in. Um, so like I said, it's been about a little over a year since we last talked, Mike, and
Yeah.
but again, just want to get you back on the show to finish this topic up because again, it's so rich, and again, your experiences
Yeah.
from being in the military kind of correlate to everyday life as what we're called to be as Catholic families or Catholic people.
Hmm.
So in the last episode, which is episode 110 for anyone listening, part one, episode 110, you talked a lot about the rules of the church and the orders of the military, like I mentioned, about
Yep.
the killing stuff, about the enmity stuff. Um, when when you got home after being assigned in Iraq and got back to your wife and kids, or to your wife, what was the thing that changed you the most after being in the army for that duration of about 12 years?
Well, the so when I got back from my deployment, what's funny, I didn't, my wife and I were engaged, but we didn't actually get
Okay,
married till shortly after I got out of the army, right? So my
gotcha.
deployment was before I had even met her. I was sort of single at the time, and for me, at that phase of my life, the one of the biggest things in terms of just life decisions, right, that came out of my deployment was I really decided to prioritize the question about discerning the priesthood, which I had thought about off and on, kind of through later years of college. My deployment was 2 years after I graduated college, and so there was a lot running through my mind, but as far like there, you get this euphoria, I think,
Right.
and I think probably most people would say that that's at least part of their experience. And some people have very different experiences if they're in a combat environment. I was very blessed that I didn't have, well, I had close calls. Yes, but I didn't have close calls as close as some others I knew. I'll put it that
Right.
way.
Sure.
And so, that just makes sense. Like, the closer that threat is to you, or the closer, the possibility of your death is to your consciousness, it's going to have a different impact on you. So I think the whole, like, the days, the weeks leading up to my return home, and then, it's a real patience game because you're flying home, and it's like you just want to be home. And a
Right.
quick funny side note for in anybody in Pennsylvania, you'll get where I'm coming from with this. We have notoriously terrible roads, and there's different theories for why that is. Part of it's that it's one of the most trafficked states in the country because you kind of have to go through Pennsylvania if you're going, north south up the East Coast, or through it east west from like Philadelphia, then out
Sure.
Pittsburgh and beyond. So the roads are bad, and there's all kinds of different theories about why that is, and why they're not fixed up better. The reason I bring it up is, um, when we were leaving Iraq, we fly down to Kuwait. We wait there for a day or so to get your connecting flight, or a few days sometimes, and then on our drive from the camp on the middle of nowhere in Kuwait to Kuwait City, where we're going to fly home, for our international flight, we're on this, like, I don't know if it was 8 lanes or what, but this huge, like, beautiful, um, perfect highway. And that's all there is, just like a desert and a highway just running
Wow.
straight through it. And it's, no potholes, like it's in incredible shape. Part of it's because it's oil money. I don't know, I haven't checked in a while, but Kuwait, like city, Kuwait, at different times has been like the highest per capita income, like, location in the world because of like
Really.
the oil wealth, really. But I had to laugh that, I fly home from Kuwait, get all the way back to, the airport in Baltimore. My dad picks me up, or I think my friend Tim picked me up because I was surprising everybody when I got home. And as soon as we, like, cross from Maryland into Pennsylvania, and the roads just starts, those potholes just gets awful, I had this simultaneous experience of discomfort and overwhelming joy.
Yeah.
Because I was
Yeah.
like, I'm home now.
Right.
Like, I know I'm home because the roads are awful. But no, in all seriousness, I think for me, when you ask what really changed through my experience, I'd like to say, I think, genuinely coming to grips with, at least in that context at that time, something that not a lot of people that age do, namely the shortness of life, and a real
Right.
appreciation for not taking it for granted. Now, I mean, I'm 40 now, and I probably take life for granted more than I don't. It's a human weakness, I think, and we can,
Absolutely.
day to day, you can forget that lesson, but I do try to remember it. And to be able to, not just remember it in theory, but remember it from experience. And so
Right.
that's something. Um, Taking that to prayer, just trying to routinely thank God, look, I'm here, and I know people who aren't, and I don't know why. I don't know why that is. Um, we even had a friend of ours from my unit, he made it home safe and sound. One of the nicest guys I ever met in my entire life, and he died of cancer like 3 years later. Um, and he was like in his 30s, and it just rocked my world. Like, why? And so there's that deeper question that I think it's good for all of us to reflect on from time to time, whether we're military minded or not, the reality that, whatever the culture says, it doesn't matter what technology we develop, what chips Elon Musk puts in your head, I mean, like,
Right.
you will not be here forever. Even if they extended our lives for hundreds of years or something, even if they could extend human life all the way, in theory, forever, we believe that, eventually the eschaton will happen, the second coming of Christ, the
Right.
parousia, right? Like, so one way or the other, it's an article of our faith, right? That this life is transitory, and, you know,
Yeah.
the way we spend it matters. So I would start with that.
Okay. No. Awesome. I mean, thank you for that. I know you touched a little bit on that last time, but I mean, it's just a good reminder, like you said, because it is human weakness. I forget about every day as well. I mean, it's one thing to wake up and thank God in the morning for that day because it's a new day, it's a new sunrise. But you get into that routine of, daily life, and by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you kind of you're just taking it for granted again. When maybe someone from school gets hit by a car or something and they die,
Yeah.
it's so I totally get that. And just being in a military family with lots of relatives who have and are serving, Mike, I totally agree
Yeah.
with what you're coming from. Is you have a lot of friends a lot of people that you know who are not here anymore. Some from combat. My grandpa served in World War II. Some came
Hmm.
home. Aftermath of that, whatever they have, it's nothing. It's something you can't take for granted. And like you said, you gotta pray and thank God every day for. And you gotta plan and strive towards the eternal life.
Yeah.
So well
Yeah.
said. Um, so are you giving after you got back and now you're married and have children, living the American dream out there in beautiful Pennsylvania besides the world conditions, um, are you giving advice to your family or other military members on your experience that you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And don't worry, I won't get too controversial here because none of us
No
wants to
problem.
get canceled or anything. But there is something that it came up. I was talking to my brother about this yesterday, and when it comes to faith and military service, I think for a long time there's been this kind of discussion, at least in my memory here, of this question of, the just war stuff, some of the things we talked about last time, which, people can go back and check that out for more of those particulars. But the question of the conscience, the question of the moral permissibility of,
Sure.
of Catholic to serve in the military in the first place, right? Or to serve in a combat environment. But then there's other things that have come up, and this is where again I'm going to be careful how specific I get, right? But questions of conscience and questions of service, maybe sometimes not in a combat environment, but just in the institution itself.
Right.
Now it's so the the general rule of thumb that you're taught when you're coming up is that not only is it impermissible to just say I was just following orders as some big blanket statement to get out of trouble for anything you do. In the Uniform Code of Military Justice, you're technically required to refuse to follow an unlawful order. So that if like in combat, if like my commander tells me to, execute civilians to try to put pressure on the enemy, I am bound by the Uniform Code of Military Justice to try to stop that there. Now, a lot of people don't, right? A lot of people under the pressure do that. But at its heart, I think the Army, which is, of course, where I served, I can't speak for every branch specifically to their procedures, but that is consistent throughout the branches. Um, my concern in the last maybe 5, 10 years, as I've been out now for goodness, I've been out for as long as I was in. Well, not 12 years. I've
No.
I've been out now for longer than I was, commissioned. I got out 10 years ago. So over the last 10 years, it's been interesting to watch. Like my brother, my cousins, I have a lot of friends who are still in the military, students who are going into the military,
Sure.
and pretty large, and I'm proud of them, pretty large number of students from the school I teach at full time, who are at the service academies, for example. So, I
Awesome.
see this and I can't help but think about them, right? And pray for them and look at what they're going into versus what I was going into. And every new generation has its ups, its downs, its challenges. One trend I've seen a lot that does concern me is certain regulatory pressures, certain kind of governmental intrusion,
Sure.
into the military, into the Department of Defense, certain, let's just say, pressure and attempts to force, in some cases, servicemen and women to adhere to, certain things, let's just say that our faith would strongly push back against, right? About the
Right.
nature of human beings and men and women and these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was some of that when I was in, and I wasn't in 30 years ago. I was 10 years ago, 10 to 20 years ago. This isn't that long ago.
Right.
And it's been sad in one sense for me to hear. I hear so many stories of good people, really good people who just feel like they can't do it. They can't stay in, and they feel pressured by their conscience to get out, or they are forced out of the army, right, for refusing certain, kind of governmental dogmas, let's just say.
Sure.
Um, and that breaks my heart because what I fear is that you can very easily then start, if that goes on for long enough, you have, I think, an increasing percentage of people forming the ranks who are people who will basically just do what they're told. Um, and it's tricky because everyone thinks like, well, that's the military. Of course you do what you're told. Well, no, not exactly. Like, yeah, you have to follow lawful orders. There is a chain of command and respect, and absolutely. But we need, I think, especially leaders who are willing to take a stand, and to be unafraid to say, no, that's a line I'm not crossing. Like, we are better than that. We are called to so much more than that. And that's where I get a little nervous because I see, I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, but you have had times in the history of the church where it did become the situation where, Catholics could not in good conscience serve in that military, right?
Right.
Right. I mean, a Catholic in Germany 100 years ago, right,
Yeah.
could not in good conscience, serve in the SS or something. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
and again, I'm not at all, please don't, viewers, I'm not comparing us. I'm just saying, we are human, and all human institutions, even the ones I love in this country, they're not perfect. They are not divinely inspired, and we have to, the way we avoid them becoming, you know, um, like those more even tyrannical systems sometimes, in those scary, police state type situations. The only way we avoid that is by avoiding it,
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
and and taking a stand. So that's just something that I've thought more over since we last talked about this,
Okay.
that I'm hearing more and more stories like that, kind of even on the home front, of friends basically being pressured or kind of forced out of the military,
Right.
unless they pinch incense to Caesar,
Yeah.
you know.
Right.
So
Yeah. And actually, I mean, don't be afraid to. I mean, if we get set, some might get set, so that if you guys, I mean, I'm not too worried about that, but
yeah.
I mean, and actually,
I
like,
dance around some of the things I'm talking about, but I
yeah,
think
yeah.
people might be able to glean some of what I'm getting at, some of the decisions of the last few years.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, even I mean, I'm just gonna bring this up real quick, and you can
Hmm.
give me your thought on it. You don't have to. Like this morning, I heard at work on the rail, President Biden, pardon everyone who is other ex-military people who were gay when you couldn't be gay in the military.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like that's really hitting hard. Like maybe what you're getting at too on the military these days. And I think going back to just the cautious standpoint, being a
Hmm.
Catholic, um, I think a lot of people maybe not join the military because of that, and that's why the military recruits numbers are so way down. Um,
Hmm.
am I on to like what you were talking about? Am I on to something or
That's that's definitely part of it, but then there's
yeah,
other things too, and there were a lot of
sure,
things during COVID, of course, and everything. And the moment you say that word, I think the algorithm pops up
yeah,
this is the true story, not what these guys. But all I want to say about, really, like, I think to see all of those kinds of issues and those hot button, kind of cultural issues,
right,
um, for me, it's what's the chain of my loyalty,
sure,
and I think we talked about that a little bit before too, but I
we
keep
did,
going back to like Thomas More, who I love so dearly, who, so you have this guy, those, I'm sure a lot of your viewers are aware of his story, but he's born in, like the 1470s. He's, I think, 1478, I want to say, and he's beheaded, I think, in 1535. And during that, he's this renowned lawyer. He's a tremendously pious man. He gets into some, I mean, now you read it today and it's sort of scandalous and shocking, but it's
right,
kind of fun to read some of his some of his
right,
dialogue with Martin Luther. It gets
right,
they didn't hold anything back then, so, but yeah, it's funny to imagine people, like state officials writing stuff like that today. Anyway, but Thomas More, here's a guy who goes to the chopping block, literally, right? He is beheaded, um, in whatever June, I think it was June or July 1535, probably June, because that's where his feast days, around there, or June or early July. And some of his last words are, right, I die the king's true servant, but God's first. And to
Right.
him, so I look at him, here's someone who is unabashedly patriotic. I mean, he absolutely believed in his case, the sort of divinely protected legitimacy of the monarch of England. Like he was,
Right.
like at no point does he go, oh, well, Henry's totally losing his mind and he's senile and he's, there's theories that he had syphilis and that affected his judgment and everything too. And
Okay.
Henry's doing these horrible, horrible things, and he is not living up to what a king is supposed to be. But Thomas doesn't, like, oh, the monarchy of England is defunct. No, he didn't say that. He prayed for the king. He prayed the king would make better decisions. He did everything he possibly could to stay out of it,
Right.
but it wouldn't leave him alone. And so I kind of take a page from his book sometimes where it's like, I'm not saying soldiers should like be parading around with flags, whatever their political kind of views are. And just to tell a quick story, if any of my old friends are watching this, I hope they won't be upset at me, but it's the
Right.
truth that, when I was in college, I was in school in DC, and a lot of, I'd say probably most of my fellow cadets in my ROTC class were, these are students from Georgetown University, George Washington, American, Marymount Catholic U,
Sure.
DC Beltway, these are a lot of people who are eyeing government service, military, government service, politics. Many of them have gone on to be elected officials. A lot of them are higher up now in the military, in the Defense Department, national security apparatus, all of it. One guy I think actually was, on White House staff at one point. Like these are the people I was in college with. And I don't know about if I'd say the majority, but many, many of them were radically far to the other side politically than I was and am
Sure.
to this day. And the ironic thing to me was I don't have a single memory of in that whole 4 years of ever bringing up politics or making any kind of political affirmation at all,
Wow.
ever in anything we ever did. I never did. I had my opinions and I still do. But what was amazing to me is how many of them were allowed to say whatever they wanted. No one ever did anything about
Sure.
it. And they would be saying pretty, like they weren't ever like advocating anything violent or overthrow, anything like that. But they would make some pretty, the gloves off political statements that I thought at the time, we're like 18, 19, 20 years old. And I remember even then thinking, hey guys, you know, this isn't the Democrat army. This isn't the Republican army. Like, we're the army of the United States of America. Like,
Right.
can be careful because, if we lose that, we're going to have some serious problems. And I do sometimes see that, that's an enduring challenge where people get very they can lose sight of what the mission of what that uniform, like you're wearing that uniform, you've got that flag on your shoulder, you got that flag on your ribbons, whatever your uniform you're wearing. What does that mean? You know? Um, and what is the nature of your loyalty? So that just that's you could say secularly speaking, I mean, just the sort of the the importance of being duty bound to the people of the nation, right? To the
Right.
Constitution, right? The what your oath says. There's nothing in your oath about like political parties.
Right.
You say you well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office appointed to you. Follow the orders of the President of the United States and the Joint Chiefs and all this, with that caveat of the like not the illegal orders or anything.
Right.
But yeah, there's nothing in there. I hereby swear fealty to, the grand old party or
Yeah.
to to the there's nothing in there like that. So that was always something. But then of course the bigger one, and I'll be quiet here and kick it back to you. We can maybe get to this in a different way or whatever if you want to keep going with it. But that bigger question of I die, the king's true subject, right? I am the true servant of, the United States of America. But
Right.
where's that line? Because I can't go over it. I just can't, you know.
Yeah.
And so I'm seeing more of that emerge, I feel like these days.
Right. And yeah, you like just going off the American flag thing too. I mean, it's the American flag, like you said. It's not the Democrat. It's not like a donkey. It's not like an elephant
Right.
representing the parties. It's the American flag. So yeah, it's like the Catholic Church. It's universal. It's not just one.
Yeah.
So definitely, I definitely, yeah, I can see that, and I think that's I think a good point that you brought, Mike, because I feel like a lot of people, um, I mean, first of all, that 4 years and not like a political thing that you talked about is really amazing. Because most people are like, we can't even get through it at we gotta bring something up at the Christmas dinner party,
Yeah,
Christmas
Thanksgiving dinner, you're always like
is
biting your nails because that one cousin or that uncle is there, and you're like, oh, please don't.
exactly.
Like
So
why?
4 years is wow, it's almost unheard of.
Or
Uh,
even if like, just to throw this out there for fun, like,
yeah,
even if you are like the world's, like biggest Donald Trump fan, it doesn't
right,
mean you have to wear a MAGA hat to Thanksgiving dinner,
right. Yeah,
Like so, but it is funny, like, because there's just always somebody, whatever your political view is, or someone who's a big like supporter of all things pride or something, and it's just like it again, it's this question of like allegiance. Like, what's your allegiance?
that's
I
true.
mean, and I think about like, people coming to my house. I mean, you can't look anywhere without seeing like a crucifix or a scripture quote. And I'm happy with that because I sometimes I do this check of like, it's not enough just to put that stuff up, but by the same token, like it's not, they're not magic talismans, I'm saying, but
Yeah,
like, what is my family choosing to, festoon our house with?
right.
And it's just this ever-present reality of I got a lot of Star Wars stuff too, but
Oh
that's
boy,
just down here, of course, for fun.
sure.
But yeah, that I think that's really important for any Catholic. I tell my students this when they are going into the middle. A lot of them, like if I catch them at graduation, one thing I'll always tell them is never, and a lot of them are going to be officers or they want to be officers, and I'll always say, never, never ask your soldiers to do something you're not willing to do. I think that's just a good leadership principle. Now, you may never do it. It may not be something that, you've got something you're supposed to be doing. You have a job you're supposed to be organizing and managing, right? That's your job. They're not doing that, right? That's on
Yes,
you. But don't, and I think that's in any company, any seminary, any parish, right? Like the pastor, for example, of a parish. I'm not a priest, but pastor should not be, giving orders, I think, to the parochial vicar in an attitude of like, high and mighty. There's always that temptation. I don't care who you are,
right.
you know. And so that's a good, I think, rule of thumb too. And something that can help keep you connected, Like I feel like if you go to mass, like so example, if you go to mass in uniform on a military post, it shouldn't feel weird, you know?
That's true.
That might be a silly thing to say. Like I never like there were some times where I would go into mass, and it would really dawn on me like the way I had been talking,
Mhm.
like that day at
Sure.
work or like, yeah, I feel kind of guilty right now because I do have this awareness of like sometimes I'm not living this, this like, and I'm in the chapel. Like sometimes this is I've let this become a part of my life. And then there's, out there I talk and behave like this. So that I think that started to change a lot for me in the military. And I'm very flawed, but there are lots of things I used to say and do and all this kind of stuff that I don't have any interest in anymore,
Sure.
and even like sometimes like people will be sending me things or they'll start to like like start army gossip and stuff. I'm just not interested in it
Yeah.
anymore. So hopefully that's a sign of where my real loyalties really became.
Right. No, and that's a great thing to take away and a great thing to get better at as well. Because I mean, just listening to well, listening, I should say, watching movies about the army and everything, it
Hmm.
is a lot of not only it's easy to lose track of where you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to be doing in terms of your faith.
Hmm.
Whether that's again, like you said, what way you're talking, the way you do something, the way whatever. It's yeah, it's an easy way to lose track of your faith. And like you said, going to church, you shouldn't feel different, you shouldn't feel awkward. I mean, it's the same thing if you go outside for mass and outside of it, outside mass, you shouldn't feel different. You're still at mass. Um, so awesome. And just going back again with like what you were saying with like kind of with the political sides is I can see it many people too not fully wanting to join or really kind of being wanting to leave the military because of all this political indifference that we're having in this country right now. And of course, being election year does not help anything anyway. But
Yeah,
just
that's always fun.
yeah, absolutely. So well said on that point, Mike. Um, so you talked about a lot so far about your students and they're going to join the military. Have you considered or thought about doing a class? Real quick, yes or no
Yeah,
question. Do you still teach on homeschool connections?
I sure do. It's funny.
Okay.
I'm wearing my shirt today. A
Oh
little
man,
advertising for
sorry,
them.
I didn't
So yeah,
notice.
there's a and not to date this too much at the time of our recording. I have some courses coming up this next school year, but I have kind of a growing library there if folks want to check it out. And if I look familiar to anybody who's aware of homeschool connections, but they can't quite figure it out, I'm the guy who for the last 2 summers now has been doing the teacher interviews. So,
Right.
new teachers or teachers who are needing to update their kind of little promo video of just advertising a little of themselves, their class a little bit. So yeah. So, but
Awesome.
I'm this question that yeah you had sent me about the idea of teaching a class or something along those lines. That is something I'm thinking about
Awesome.
more and more. I don't really have a plan yet, but when you brought it up, it just planted the seed because I'm starting to have these conversations with Maureen Whitman, Mrs. Whitman,
Yeah.
who's one of the founders of Homeschool Connections, and just the nature of the cycle for producing the registration materials. You have to kind of think pretty far ahead. So usually I'm getting emails from her like October, November, basically saying, "Hey, next year, what do you have
Oh,
in mind?" And so like we usually are supposed to send by like early January well, um, yeah, usually by Thanksgiving you have to, say, "Hey, here's just a rough sketch. Like here's what I'd like to try next year." And
yep.
then you need to get by like January a more formalized, like here's your syllabus kind of for potential courses, your pace structure and stuff.
Gotcha.
Uh, And so usually the way I do it is if it's a new course, I get the idea out there, and sometimes that's all I've got. I have enough to put together like an overview,
Yep.
and then I'll sit on it for like months, and then when I find get some time in the summer is when I'll really like get down to work and be like, okay, oh, it's like I have a course people are signing up for right now that doesn't exist,
Yep.
technically. It's like, so I got to develop this thing and be ready to go. So that's it wouldn't be for this upcoming school year, but it's possible, or even, like I was thinking like a summer session. So
Sure.
Homeschool Connections has a lot of flexibility, as there's like 4 week, very topical courses. So I thought there might be room for something in terms of leadership, military service leadership or I don't know, faithful citizenship. That's a theme the bishops talk about a lot that
Right.
is it broadly includes things like this, but also voting and like that might be a neat course for like seniors or something, like who are gonna be 18 this year, and how do you do that? So that might be like a good little summer project or something.
Awesome.
I'll have to
Uh,
give that some thought. I'll brainstorm with her about it, and if it works out, I'm gonna tell her it's your idea.
no.
So-
I think that would be the Holy Spirit walking through me and telling you that
There you go.
it's
Yep.
not my idea. I'm not I graduated in high school and college, Mike. I'm not too smart though, so I'm just letting you
That's
know.
all
But
right.
yeah,
None of us are as smart as we could be, that's for sure.
right, absolutely. So, well, good. Glad that you're thinking about that
Yeah.
and it's in the works. And truthfully, again, I just think that would be a good thing to do. Like you mentioned, like high school seniors, I can really see that.
Yeah.
Again, as they leave the nest, so to say, and kind of
Yeah.
take flight on their own. That would be
Well,
an
and this
excellent one.
and if I may too, because
Yeah,
I always am very careful when I say things like this because I don't want to, you know, denigrate anybody or in particular or anything like that. It's been my experience that the reality very often, and I think it just happened, basically because of decades of a lot of our Catholic schools just kind of falling into the patterns of progressive education
right.
that the government schools have. And I think Trent Horn has been on that for a few years where like I've kind of I'm calling them public schools far less and calling them government schools, not to be
Yeah,
controversial, but that's absolutely what they are. But a lot of our Catholic schools, you know, they just basically will have the same textbooks, obviously as a lot of the public schools so for example, like you might have a 12th grade government class, right? We have one at the school I teach at, and I uh, very much respect, my colleague, who teaches that class. He's a very bright guy. Um, but it's just I don't know that it's on our department, for example, or most high school departments' radars in Catholic schools to like, for example, teach the civics course if they still have one, right? The government course,
Right.
um, in a way that's not just informational, as good as that is, but completely from the heart of the church.
Right.
Like that's just not done in most
No.
places. And again, people just don't think of it. It's like we have a course. What do we got to teach these kids how to engage with the world? And here's the text, and here's these materials and resources, and here's this, um, video on YouTube on the Electoral College that they can, it's all
Right.
these resources and trying to capitalize on all that. And that's great. But there's no, we're going to read the bishop's document on faithful citizenship.
Right.
At least I'm
Yeah.
not aware of them looking at that. And so I think that there is room, I think, for something like that, for a place like Homeschool Connections, for example, that is, maybe trying to be a little more intentional with some of those really leading from the heart of the faith, and finding those points of integration. That's a phrase
Yeah.
Chesterton Academies use a lot, the points of integration, that it's, you get these different converging kind of elements of different subjects that helps you see the way that they unite in Christ. It's so important.
Right. No, I glad that you said that because again, I think people will look at it too. They just forget about it. I mean, it's we're so
Yeah,
adapted to the world. It's like you said, we got to prepare a case for the world. This is what we
yeah,
have. You get overwhelmed about this is. I gotta make sure my students, my kids have enough material, and you lose
right.
track of that. So totally
Or,
agree.
or they, or they, yeah, they never learned it. They might have
Yeah,
gone to public school themselves. They might be a convert to Catholicism. They might not be Catholic. They might be teaching at the Catholic school, and just no fault of their own. Like they went and got a bachelor's degree or master's or whatever. Like they love history, they love politics, and they're trying to bring that knowledge to this, and they teach it that way.
right,
Whereas, I think the approach should be, hey, everybody, the gospel first, foremost. How does American history itself, and then beyond all the subsets of it, right? How does all of it somehow reflect or show hostility towards, in some cases, right, the gospel message? Like
right.
that just has to be first, I think, if you're a fully, genuinely integrated Catholic school.
Absolutely. Well said. Yeah, and we're about to the end of the show, Mike. So I guess it's time to wrap up the series here, unless you want to do part three. Um, is I guess my question here is just what is again with everything that you said last time, everything you brought back and you mentioned for the fourth time this time. I guess your final word as we
Yeah.
depart.
Well, if I thought I saved it for here at the end. Two, if I may, I think two short little anecdotes that really are in the same theme of like how what a small world it is, and
Okay.
that the Catholic world is small, and the army, right? These communities that are all around the world, right? All these complicated moving pieces, and like the people you bump into, so like my brother bumped into a high school friend of his during the sign of peace, at mass at a chapel in like some fort, what, I don't even know what
Really?
base he was at. And they were both like, they're looking at
What?
each other's name tags, like, what?
What?
Are you
Wow.
what? And then my
Right.
favorite one was um when I got back, and I'll name drop him just for the heck of it. But when I got back from my deployment, and it was within, I want to say, about a year, so we were still kind of talking about it, and of course, and um and my dad's telling this story. I don't know where it came from. We're just sitting at the table. We were all kind of around, and we're all kind of adults. And dad's telling this story about his army days, and he's like this really funny kind of like story of this kind of prank, kind of a prank that they played on this younger soldier, and we're kind of chuckling. And he says the guy's name, um, and he mentions, yeah, and then says his name, and I just like, and dad's kind of laughing at the story, but I just freeze, and I was like, wait a minute, what name? And he says the name again, and I'm like, where was he from? And my dad's like, one of the Dakotas, I think. And I'm like, is it
Well,
possible that he is a priest now? My dad's
right.
like, what? And so, long story short, we go through this whole thing. Well, we come to find out that this guy who was just a kid, like a private in my dad's unit, in like the early 1980s. Years later, went to seminary,
Wow.
became a priest, and became an army chaplain, and was at that time, I think, a major or lieutenant colonel. And he was one of my chaplains in Iraq, not from my unit, but at like the adjacent post that I sometimes went to mass at.
Okay.
And I had read at mass, and I had this relationship I'd kind of developed with kind of him over there in my deployment. And we were just like, I look it up online, I find some like news bulletin somewhere, his pictures there. My dad's just like getting in tears, just stunned, like, what in the
Wow.
world? And then my brother comes over and looks at the picture and he goes, I had him too on my deployment.
Seriously.
Which was in a totally different part of the country like 2 years before this. And so, long story short, my dad, like goes, like looks him up on Google, finds the parish that he's priest at when he's back home because he's off duty now. I think he might be retired. And my dad gets an email correspondence with him, and they have these chats about the old days. And he confesses sort of to this priest. He was like, he was like, I was telling the story, and I always felt a little bad. I felt like we kind of, tricked you or whatever with this prank thing. And then the priest writes back and he's like, hey, he goes, no worries. He goes, I always look back on those days and remember, how great you guys were and you taught me so much about leadership. And there's just this beautiful like exchange decades later, almost,
Wow.
35 years later. And I've got there's several stories, like that. It's just there's a real beauty, to see that there is not an automatic incompatibility, with being a person of sincere faith, and how important it is to have good people, to
Wow.
have holy people there, And so I do encourage, it's tricky to just recommend it to, anybody. I think it has to be right for you. But if you feel like you might be, called into that, please don't be afraid. Don't feel like you have to check your faith at the door. It might be harder now than it is in some other times of the military, but it's never easy. Um, it's never perfectly easy. And yeah, you might have a calling, right, to bring the gospel into that particular venue, and that's all part of especially Second Vatican Council, Gaudium et Spes, right? This
Right.
idea of being the faithful in the world. That's part of our mission.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, man, it is a small world, and I like what I like that. Absolutely. And also, Mike, I like to plug this thing as well. I think you
Hmm.
might like to listen to this episode. I did episode 140 a couple months
Hmm.
ago. I did with Army chaplain Father, like nickname is Father Uncle Sam, and we talked about what's like being in the Army chaplain. What's it like traveling
Yeah,
around troops? So for anyone who has not listened to that one yet, or as you, Mike, might want to check that one out. Again,
I will
it's
definitely have to check that out.
episode 140. We did a couple months ago, and uh, really great to have Father Sam on. And yeah, it was a really
Yeah,
eye-opening experience. So when you
I'll bet.
uh when you bring that up, it really we're back there. So yeah. So real quickly, Mike. I know you have to get going, but real quickly, can you just throw a plug in for your the gracious guest?
Yeah, the easiest way is probably just, the website, either, thegraciousguest.org is the website, or folks just, you go on YouTube and type The Gracious Guest, it'll come right up. You'll see me there. And I've got, mostly interviews. I kind of got into that a few years ago, and that's been the format I prefer. Some teaching videos, some solo things, shorts here and there, but mostly long form interviews, exorcists, a lot of Shroud of Turin stuff, classical education, the journey of faith, all kinds of stuff. So the
Sure.
easiest way to check that out. Yep.
Awesome. We'll have
And of course, homeschool connections too. You check out my
right.
instructor page there and
Bam.
see all those courses that are there. So
Awesome. We'll have other links down in the show notes below. So it's easy access for everyone who is listening. And like I said, highly check them out. I actually get notifications for you, Mike, on YouTube. So every time you post something, I get
oh,
notified.
nice.
And it's I can see how busy you are and how great a job that you're doing. So thank you for the work that you do on the Gracious Guest. And
Yeah.
yeah, so Mike Creavey, 12 years in the military. Again, the Gracious Guest, check it out. Lives in beautiful Pennsylvania. And again, actually, Mike, keep me updated on if that
Yeah.
comes to class or not, because I would love, if we don't talk before then, I would
Yeah.
love to have you back on, discuss that if that
Yeah.
happens.
Oh, I love that. And any of the courses I teach on there too, if you ever want, want to talk about any of those, I'm happy to come
Sure.
back. So there's some exciting stuff coming up. But yeah.
Awesome.
All
Absolutely.
right.
But yeah, Mike Creavey one. Again, Mike, thank you for today, for your time today, and thank you for serving our country.
Thank you so much, Billy. I appreciate it.
No problem. Mike Creavey one. Check him out. Gracious guest. And as you can see, I even include the American flag back here
I
for
saw that.
today's
Yep.
show.
Nice.
Uh,
Very nice.
yeah, gotta get the touchdown. All right,
That's right.
everyone. Yeah. See you next week, God willing. Same time, same place. Stay in the sacraments. Excuse me. Stay in the state of grace. Go to the sacraments, and
Amen.
share the show. And we'll see you next time on Catholic Table Talk.
It is always a real delight to talk with William, to share that time with him. And I felt very humbled that he had me on this time to go into some issues here or there that are all very personal, or I'm personally invested in them, and potentially controversial. But I think they're very important to consider, and hopefully you have been able to maybe think about them in a little bit different way, or at least it's opened up some questions that you might want to go deeper into. And if you do, feel free to reach out to William. Again, make sure you subscribe to his channel, Catholic Table Talk, which I've linked below. Make sure you subscribe here and share this far and wide. And until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.